Everyone, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies for getting started just a couple minutes later than expected. But thank you again so much for joining us online for tonight's reading and conversation with Lisa Hsiao Chen and Anelise Chen, celebrating Lisa's new novel, Activities of Daily Living, which I hope you will all get a copy of. My name is Lily Philpott. I'm the programs manager at the Asian American Writers Workshop, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our virtual event space. A quick visual description of me. I have short, dark hair, round glasses with dark frames, and I'm wearing a colorfully patterned shirt. This event is taking place across multiple time zones, so please do say hi and let us know in the chat where you're watching from. I'm speaking to you today from Brooklyn, New York, where I am on ancestral and unceded Canarsie and Munsee Lenape land. For those of you who are new to the AAWW, we are a national nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting Asian and Pacific diasporic literature and storytelling. We hold frequent readings and conversations like this one, organize community arts programming in New York City high schools and senior centers, run fellowship programs for emerging writers of color, and publish an award-winning online literary magazine called The Margins. Please do make sure to purchase copies of Lisa and Annalise's books, which you can do via the bookshop link my colleague just dropped into the chat. You can also find out more by visiting us at aaww.org or following us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, where the recording of this event will be posted. During the event, we ask that all audience members practice nonviolence in the chat. Comments that are racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and/or misogynist will be flagged, and the person will be removed from this event. We are going to open our event with a reading from Activities of Daily Living, followed by conversation with Lisa and Anelise, and then we'll have time for audience Q&A. So please submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I am going to briefly introduce our speakers, and then again, hope you'll join me in welcoming Lisa on screen to read. Lisa Hsiao Chen is the author of the novel Activities of Daily Living and Mouth, a Book of Poems. She has received a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award and has held fellowships and residencies at the Center for Fiction and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. She was born in Taiwan and now lives and works in Brooklyn. Anelise Chen is the author of So Many Olympic Exertions, published by Kaya Press in 2017, which was a finalist for the VCU Kabul First Novelist Award. She is currently at work on a memoir, Clam Down, which will be published by One World, based on her mollusk column for the Paris Review. In 2019, she was a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree, and she teaches creative writing at the University. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and please join me in welcoming Lisa on screen as we get ready to celebrate Activities of Daily Living. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lily, and thank you so much to the workshop for creating this virtual space for us to meet. I miss the space in Midtown, and I hope you guys open up soon. I'm wearing chunky black glasses with little cat tips and a black and white scarf, and my hair is a little messy, but it's about shoulder length. I'm gonna do a short reading, and I'm gonna set it up a little bit by explaining just a short description of what the book is. It is about a woman named Alice, who is a freelance video editor by day, and she becomes fixated on this performance artist named De Xie, who will be referred to as the artist in the segment that you're going to hear. And he's kind of a legendary but under-recognized artist, active mostly in the 1980s in New York, for these monumental durational pieces that he made, where he locked himself in a cage for a year, tied himself to another artist for a year. And the book just sort of follows her trying to work that project while life itself starts to interrupt into it, including caring for her father, who has dementia, and working, protesting, volunteering at a place that sends books to people in prison. I wanted to read this segment today because it's April, and in April 1980, Xie launched his third one-year durational project, which is that he punched a time clock on the hour every hour for like a year. So this kind of grueling, sleepless feat. And the other reason I wanted to read it is because some of the good news that's come out in the last couple of weeks is the unionization of Amazon workers in Staten Island. So you'll hear a little bit about that too, embedded in the back of your mind, I hope, as you listen to this. So I'm gonna read from the screen, so I'll look like I'm looking into space. The artist made a 6-minute film of time clock piece. It's stitched together from photographs taken of the 8,627 times he stood in the same spot, every hour on the hour that he punched the clock. In the film, 1 hour is collapsed into 1 second. The artist appears to shudder slightly in place. His hair sprouts and grows past his shoulders. Next to him, the hour and the minute hands of the punch clock spin wildly around the dial like an out-of-control time machine. Earlier that morning, Alice had read a news item about a New Jersey woman who'd been found dead in her car in a convenience store parking lot. The woman worked 3 part-time shifts for a donut conglomerate for $8.25 an hour and was catching a short nap between shifts when she died of carbon monoxide poisoning. The article did not say whether the company used workforce efficiency software, but Alice couldn't help but wonder if hers was a death by algorithm. 3 years into Time Clock Piece, the artist would have begun feeling the effects of sleeplessness. First the fog, then the delirium. Months in, he would have found it harder and harder to keep his eyes open, which is why he rigged a system of 12 alarm clocks to go off at once. He then set a microphone next to the alarm on his wristwatch and hooked that to a loudspeaker. Still, he managed to sleep through more than 100 clock-ins. When we sleep, we can't work, we can't shop, we can't download, surf, or stream. We can't be tracked by a global positioning system or mined for data. Human beings used to sleep an average of 8 hours a night. Now we sleep 6.5. The punch clock was invented in 1888 by a jeweler who lived in Auburn, a town off the tip of the Finger Lakes. Punch clocks aren't necessarily punched anymore. The new systems are biometric. You clock in by submitting your fingerprint, a finger vein, a retina. With biometric time clocks, you can't punch in for a friend who is running late from a child's doctor's appointment or who is hung over with their head over a toilet. The punch clock didn't invent time, but its surveillance. The same year the inventor of the punch clock filed a patent, a Buffalo man became the first person to be legally executed by electric chair. The execution took place at Auburn Prison in New York, which is also the first penal institution in the world to profit from prison labor. The men at Auburn Prison made clothes, shoes, boots, nails, carpets, buttons, brooms, and buckets. They also made clocks. People on death row aren't allowed to enroll in educational or vocational programs. This is because they're understood to have no future, so such programs would be a waste of taxpayer money. But at San Quentin, the men on death row are permitted to take part in one type of program, art. The artist is often asked how much he suffered to make his performances. He replies that he didn't suffer, that making the pieces gave him pleasure. Some who have written about Time Clock Piece point out how exhausted the artist looks. Yet when Alice looks closely at the artist's face in the film, in the photographs, she doesn't see it. What she sees is the will of a man stitching himself into time. Only after the piece was completed was the artist disconsolate. He felt that way after all his pieces ended, he said, because it meant returning to the life of an ordinary man. And I'm just going to share on the screen a little visual of the artist for those who can't see. It's stills from his performance where he's very young. He's like in his 20s, standing next to a punch clock, and he's bald in one column, and then he has a lot of hair on the other to sort of show how time has passed while he's been punching the clock. Thank you.
Should I start now? Is it my turn to jump in? Okay. Hi all. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the workshop for hosting us tonight. I have been waiting forever. I mean, not forever in like an accusatory way, Lisa, but I've just been so excited for this book to come out, and finally this is the night to celebrate you. And I know we're on Zoom, so we can't like hear each other and get the nice vibes of being in the space, but if you could just, give Lisa a round of applause. And I know there are a lot of admirers here in the audience, so yes, clap, clap, clap. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, and also shout out to Jenna and Jenny for hosting. Okay, so I am sitting in my office. I'm wearing, actually Lisa and I didn't plan this, but we're kind of coordinated in our outfits. We're both wearing stripy things. It's blue. I also have shoulder length hair. So yeah, we just look like any other Asian lady, but no, but okay. So that is, and yes, keep track of your questions as we talk. So I know I'm gonna cover some things, but I definitely won't cover all. So start putting your questions in the chat. Okay, great. Lisa, are we ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Just a general question to kick us off. Can you tell us a little bit about how the book came about? What was the germ of the idea? What was sort of situationally happening in your life at the time? I mean, you don't have to reveal that, but just when did you start to realize that you were writing this book?
Yeah, the book I feel like came out of both failure and urgency. And the failure was that I had I'd quit my 9 to 5 job to devote more time to writing, and I was writing a novel uh, about like a colony of snow monkeys in upstate New York in Japanese silent film, and it wasn't going anywhere. And the other thing that was happening was my partner Andy and I realized, wow, our parents are not going to live forever, and that we needed to sort of spend more time with them, and of course we're getting older too. So I think the confluence of sort of I quit this job that I was literally like billing, every 15 minutes I had to like bill my time, thinking about writing and thinking about parents, and then thinking about the artist who had always been in the back of my mind, Touching Xie, but whose focus on time as his material started just roaring to the forefront. So I think I thought I just wanted to write about his work, and I wanted to sort of use him as a model. And what I did was I set the monkey novel aside and just decided I would write like a daily diary, and like the artist, whatever came out of that diary would be, the content or the material of this new thing that I was working on, that I decided to be genre agnostic about. I wasn't going to think too much about whether it was fiction or nonfiction, but just to let time sort of lead the way.
Yeah, I love that genre. You weren't gonna be agnostic about genre. I mean, this is one of those books that, and I've been telling everyone this. This is one of those books that is really gonna push the novel genre into, you know, brand new directions. And you can say you read it here first. But it's really, it's just one of those books that I think is, that I find so exciting for that reason. So I wanted to talk a little bit about projects, and you know, because so much of the book is this tension with, I mean, and many of us probably feel this, but when you're, you know, this tension of, is a project enriching my life, or is the project taking me away from my life, right? So it could be an art project, a writing project, a work project, but we tend to want to structure our lives around projects. And Alice has this Teaching Shape, you know, project, which is driving the forward movement of the novel. But as we, you know, when you actually think about the doing of the project, so often you're just sitting alone in a room, it's very painful, you know, or you have to be away from your family, you know, so the actual like doing of the thing seems to take you away from, you know, what we call life. So there's always this tension of life and non-life, you know, art and life. And I don't know if, you know, I don't know if you have, you know, if you think about it in such binary terms, but I was just wondering if, you know, after the writing of the book, if you've landed, you know, in one place stronger than, you know, in one position stronger than the other, if you see projects as this sort of, you know, a redemptive kind of, it's a frame that you put around something in order to make it less painful in a way. I mean, in that passage you just read, you know, Teaching Shay says that he didn't even suffer when he did the time clock piece, which is unbelievable, because you just, in the book, you go through in excruciating detail like what sleep deprivation does to the mind. And for him to say, well, I didn't suffer, you know, because if everything is encapsulated into the project, then it allows you to kind of bear that. But so yeah, anyway, I was just wondering if you thought, you know, if you're like yay projects or nay projects.
What are my thoughts on projects? So in the writing of the book, the word project had became a sort of funny, like, code for what I was doing. And I guess I should back up and say that when I moved to New York like 15 years ago, I met a man who was like an activist and a writer, and his business card said a man with a lot of projects. And I looked at the card and like I'm not in touch with him anymore, but I remember that card because I thought, well, in a weird way, I think I moved to New York to meet people who are working on multiple projects. And and why is that and what is that? I think of projects as sort of like almost like a way of concretizing like a dream or an idea, and it's it's kind of tragic comic and grandiose. Like I feel like sometimes I'll say I'm working on a project to sort of beef up this thing that is, or inflate this thing that is very larval. And but that's sort of what's beautiful about them too, and why I love people to talk to people about their projects, because it requires a level of trust to talk to somebody about something that's not fully formed. So it becomes a kind of a refrain in the book. And I think what I've tried to do is show, as you described, like how the project keeps morphing, as Alice needs it to be. Whether it's a sort of a crutch, a sort of like this thing that she wants to, that she thinks will advance her life forward, make her life better. And then it just keeps changing, especially I think with long-term projects, like a novel or book. And I think that's kind of what the part of the appeal of Touching Xie's work is for writers too, in particular, is this like ordeal, this very long, like what's happening, and the feeling that you want it, you're working towards a finish line. So I guess yay or nay on the project. I think yay. I think I agreed later, maybe like 2/3 of the way through the book. There's a section with Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote a book called The Coming of Age in her 60s, which is a book that isn't talked about as much as her more famous ones. And it's actually out of print, but it was like the 600-page book, her take on like how we discard older people, how old people are, once they retire or forced out of their jobs, a lot of them are like, what do I do with my time? What do I do with my life? And her conviction was that, old people, you must have a project, because she believed so much in her own projects and Sartre's projects as a way to just give meaning to all ages of your life. So in that regard, I agree with her, even though I'm biased because I'm obsessed with projects.
um, yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, like, if that was one of my main takeaways, is it's about the framing of it. So I mean, having a project kind of connotes freedom, and at one point in the book, Alice is talking to a taxi driver, and the
Uh-huh.
taxi driver says, "In America, you can afford everything except life itself." So again, there's this like life and non-life distinction. But in that sense, I mean, but in that case, um, you can we really, I mean, can we call work and life a project? Because we don't choose it. We're just, it's instrumental, and we're doing it for survival. But Tei-Ching Hsieh, on the other hand, I mean, he collapses that distinction between art and life. So I'm just thinking in one of his last pieces, the no art piece that lasted for 13 years, he vows not to make art for 13 years. And then at the end of it, he comes out and says, "I kept myself alive." So, you know, that gesture just makes me wonder. I mean, does that, does the framing of that make that whole, the 13 years, whatever happens, all the meals that were eaten, all the, the sleeping, the shitting, the everything that happens, does that make it more meaningful? So that's just sort of what was going through my mind. Yeah, that's not really a question.
Yeah, I think,
But
well, one thing I learned reading like basically every interview I could find about him is that it might not seem obvious from a distance, but he was very adamant when he described all his performance works that one naturally led to the next. So we can think, well, he spent a year punching that time clock. And then the next one he did was he spent a year entirely outdoors, not going into any buildings, basically like sort of shuffling off work. He just hung around outside. He and I think this is an interesting, the last two pieces that you described. So no art piece is actually a year. That's when he said I would not make any art at all. And
mm,
then the very last piece, which is the 13-year piece that you described, which I'm always confused what he calls that. I guess we'll call it the 13-year plan. He always thought those two things were, one naturally led to the other. What does it mean to not make art, refuse to make art, not fulfill what it means to be an artist, which is to make
mhm,
art, and then decide I'm going to remove yet another layer, which is, okay, I'm going to make art now, but I'm going to remove the audience. So it's a little bit like if a tree falls in the forest, is the art still there? um, so it's a kind of and then he just declared that he wouldn't make art at all. And what does that final gesture mean? So I think the book hopefully kind of leads you. No spoilers. The spine of the book is to walk you through each of his projects while sort of life unfolds at the same time, and just to say that by the end, what does it mean to have let go of this thing that had been so important to him as a young man, that he was willing to, you know, leave Taiwan, undocumented, work in kitchens for 4 years here in New York City, and to be an artist. So something profound has happened. um, and I invite you all to think about it if you read the book.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next, big question in your book, which is like, how do we account for a life? I mean, this is the question that that Alice keeps ruminating on. So Alice is caretaking for, is taking care of her ailing father and is tasked with clearing out his house, which is like decades of belongings.
Yeah.
And so as she's doing that, all the objects, right? Like, does this account for the life? Is it these objects? How do you narrativize this? And then, as he declines, his life becomes more and more these logs from the care facility, activities of daily living. So yeah, I mean, I think I was really struck by this one scene where Alice goes to the 9/11 museum and is one of the displays, and there's like a display about one of the unfortunate people who died. He's a vice president, and just the incidental details that are mentioned on his plaque. It's like he was really fastidious about grooming, and he liked to keep, he put a piece of tape on his side of the room to delineate, whatever. And then Alice wonders, like, wow, I wonder, he probably didn't think that his life would be summed up in this way. So to me, there seems to be like this great anxiety, or, a sense of anxiety about who is going to do the accounting and how we are accounted for once we are gone, and is art a way to, is art a way to kind of have the final word? But yeah, so as you worked through, the book, have your ideas evolved around that? Just how is life accounted for? And
Yeah. I will say that one of the other things that happened very early when I was conceptualizing the book, which was helpful, which is the question that you started with, was there was this very like viral commencement speech that the artist Carrie Mae Weems made, which starts out like, what is the measure of a life? And she's talking to students at the School of Visual Arts. So she's talking to artists and, just, how are you going to measure it day by day, hour by hour? And I was, of course, thinking about that. When's this novel? But right, it's certainly I guess the vanity of the writer and the artist is that, you're going to preserve this, whatever it is that you're working on, for all time. And certainly Alice in the book at one point thinks, her father is dying. So she's like, shit, is this project a way of both keeping him alive and sort of sealing him in amber in some way?
mm-hmm.
And again, that's who is that? Who's that for? Is that for her? Is that for him? Is that I don't know. So that question, like, what is the measure of a life, I think keeps shape-shifting through the book as the book itself takes form. And I guess what's happening to me as I get older is you just start to realize that, like, the thing that gives your life form is death, which is really morbid, but the closer you come up to death, the more the realization of what you have done, what you probably won't have time to do, and sort of what the time you have left is. And it comes, vividly to life for Alice's father, because he has run out of time. And so she's able to, as I think many of us with older parents, like, you think about their lives first, right, before you can fully grapple with your own. And so I think that's one of the last lessons they teach you. Yeah.
Yeah, that really, I mean, that reminds me, there was this video going around a couple years ago. It's like an interview with John Berger and Susan Sontag, and they're I think Berger is the one. He says all stories begin at the moment of death, because it's only with death that you can have a full accounting of that life. And you know, so they're arguing about this. But yeah, it's almost like, you know, when you're writing a book too, it's, you can't really narrativize it until you have all the fragments. Like you can't really give it a form until you have
Yeah.
everything already in full, you know, folders. And because before that it's just in the process of becoming. So that's it's a lot harder to write about. But okay, well, I'm gonna move on to my last. Well, it's not my last, but it's my second to last. So you and I are both, we, you know, we love fragments and we love research. We love doing too much research. So you know, but this is why I love your book, because there's just so many facts, and then I feel like I'm going down that internet wormhole with you, and discovering things in real time. It's really fun. But then the process of writing isn't always great, because then you have like, so, you know, such a mass of, you know, of notes, and there was this little there's just this little like metafictional moment that I highlighted because I was laughing. But you know, I'll just read it. Spinning its wheels, lightless at the end of the tunnel, such cliches seemed apropos. She was swimming in material, text, images, video, interviews, notes, so many notes. But the form of the thing, how the project would come together, how it would take, eluded her. At one point, she considered throwing everything against the wall, or rather into some kind of mixed media installation. So I totally relate to that, just wanting to like toss it against the wall and like having it land where it may. But the book has such cohesion. I mean, there's it, for me at least, it really is a page turner, and it's not just a bunch of bits that are collaged together. So I'm just curious about how you like ultimately found the form, or if that was important to you as you were writing. You know, how much of it was organic and how much of it was artifice, and how did you ultimately make those decisions?
Yeah. Um, I think that the rope through the snowstorm, like the thing that, you know, even if there was I couldn't see anything, the rope I kept holding on to was that I knew I had to write about each of his 6 pieces, and that those would go chronologically, the artist's performance pieces. So that spine was always there. As I mentioned earlier, there were all these like diary entries that I had meant to keep for like a year that ended up going for several years, and that was actually a mess, to decide how much could be kept, how much could be discarded. Um, and then I would say, so then something happened, which is, so then I did have to make a decision about, is this fiction or not, or nonfiction? You know, is this, as Picasso says, what's his line? Art is the lie that tells the truth.
Mm.
So I just also started to like I started just really lose interest in facts in a weird way. It's not the what quite what I wanted to say. Well, let me answer it this way. Margot, while I was writing this book, I read Margot Jefferson's Negro Land, which is her what she calls a cultural memoir of growing up black and bougie, right?
Mhm.
And I read an interview with her where she says, uh, you know, there's something about the memoir where, you know, she was writing it, you just start to realize that like you or the person is theatricalized or is dramatized. It's
Mhm.
already something else. It's not, you know, what actually happened, even though it is in her case, she did commit to a memoir. Um, but I think that that part of the form, the sort of tearing away of fact and fiction, is it was the last bit that I had to figure out. And the the reason I did that was because well, it's a bunch of different reasons, but I guess one way I could answer this is that the book opens with a little prologue, and Teaching Xie is has has jumped off this boat in Philadelphia. He like took a cab to New York. He's like worked the kitchen work that I described, and then he decides to film himself for like 45 minutes while he like cleaned the floors of the restaurant and stacked the chairs. And then he looked at the film and he was like, oh, it's the same time, it's the same 45 minutes that I was cleaning, but this is very early on. He hadn't even made a performance piece yet. Like something had been alchemized, like something had changed. So I feel like I'm one of those people for whom the novel is. I'm always annoyed when writers say the novel wrote itself because it didn't. But certainly the novel, the art, the making of the work started to find its way past my own like magic tricks or whatever, my own like what I thought I was going to do. And then that answered the question of fiction and nonfiction that I had been setting aside, and finally became a whole. So I guess wow, that's a really complicated answer, but as you described the question, it's like, how do you take all these pieces and put it together? And I think maybe part of is, as writers or artists, we want to leave that part a little mysterious in our minds, or for most of my career as a professional, I was like a communications specialist for social justice organizations, and my work was about like messaging and like, changing people's minds, making sure that like whatever we said was in the service of social change or changing legislation or whatever it was. And I think when I started to move back into my own writing, like I was so liberated to like go into gray areas, or to write something that that I didn't have to follow any rules. So I think that was part of the fragmentary mess, the sort of the pleasure, I guess. I had pleasure to do the piece. Right. I didn't suffer. I did suffer. Yeah.
Suffering is always a part of it. But yeah, I mean, it's really resonating with me what you're saying about at one point you weren't interested in facts anymore, and that always is the moment that clicks for me too. And I stopped being interested in facts and I just kind of let something else take over, lies. Yeah. Okay, so last really short question. So in the book, well, is this? It's okay. It's not giving anything away. But so Lisa, you and I have actually, and Eugene, we have actually met Teaching Xie in real life. We conducted an interview with him. I found the experience of meeting him to be so bewildering. I mean, I can't even narrativize what happened in the 4 or 5 hours I believe we spent, caged in his apartment with him. But can you just describe what that experience was like for you after this long writing process? And did it change your mind about him? Did it give you any new insights? Yeah.
Yeah, well, let me back up and say that this interview happened because our friend Eugene Lim, the writer and novelist, was invited by The Believer to do an interview with anyone he wanted. And those of you who have read his novel Dear Cyborgs, Teaching Xie makes an appearance in there. So, and he knew, of course, that I was working on this project. So he said, "Hey, do you want to do this interview?" And I had to be like pulled in kicking and screaming because I had it in my mind, and that I wouldn't talk to him, that I like wanted to do this project without, which may sound just completely ridiculous to people out there, but I had this weird like monastic rule. And in the book, actually what happens is Alice never does interview the artist. But I'm not Alice. So yes, we did in fact go to Touching Shay's place and interview him for a long time. And I think one funny thing is I had a lot of sympathy, for these celebrity profilers who like write for like magazines. Like you're always trying to like get the actor or the star to like say something new or revealing, and
Yeah.
why is that so important to us? I think partly because I had read all these interviews and I knew that he had started to um because also you're like he gets the same questions all the time. So, so
It
I
was
think,
very on script.
yeah, so we were trying to like get something a little more out of him, and again also kind of feeling like why do I need to do this? So, and of course I was just like also just like you, just like kind of starstruck and just couldn't believe that this person that you had read about so much uh
He was just offering us.
or whatever. So
Yeah, like
one, he was very generous, of course, with his time. I think, what did we learn? I don't know. In a weird way, it felt like that it. I was glad to have done it. Of course, I used some of the interview in this book,
mhm.
including discovering that he really likes spaghettis and clams. That's his favorite
Yeah,
Italian dish.
right.
That was our big scoop.
I know that should have been just the
But,
teaching shade. That was our contribution to the archive.
and that I guess he retained still a lot of mystery. And maybe what was also fascinating is the things that we can't talk about on this call, on this Zoom, or that I couldn't discuss in the book, which was that he had said some very candid things, which had he really had like, a PR person, he might not have wanted to, he might have decided, oh wait, maybe I don't want this out there. And,
Mhm.
we protected him. Whether he wanted the information out there or not. This is sounding much more mysterious and exciting than it really is.
Oh,
But
it was. It was.
but the bottom line is there is something I think that we were talking about this earlier, Annalise, today on the phone, like something like deliberately unpolished about him. Like he's almost like whether it's real or whether he's like protected himself to not become this sort of, you know, I don't even know what to call it, a celebrity, I guess.
Mhm.
That he keeps part of himself uh, shrouded in mystery. And I think one of the funny things I've learned in talking to this book with other people is discovering how many sort of Asian American writers and artists uh, have gone to he owns a little dumpling and coffee shop in Brooklyn. How
Mhm.
many people have gone and, as they say, spied on him, stalked him, just sat there knowing that that was touching Shay and not saying anything,
Yeah.
which I thought was just so, um, one, just sort of like respectful in a sort of Asian way, like give the man space. Not that, of course, when I saw Bjork at IFC Theater, I pretended like she wasn't there, but right, the fact that we would go to his cafe and just sit there, like drinking our coffee, waiting for him. I think
Yeah.
it's just so cute and sweet and a lot of love.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think Lily's going to take it over with audience questions. Please ask them and ask Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. Thank you, Annalise, for these questions. I think I hadn't realized that you both had met him alongside Eugene. So I love ending with this story. This is incredible. We have a couple of audience questions. Again, if there are others, please do drop them in the Q&A box or in the chat. I'll scroll everywhere. The first question is from Richard, who asks, is there another individual who you would like to research and write about? And what about that individual draws you to them?
That's an interesting question. Well, there's two things, I guess two ways of answering that. In the course of thinking about Dojing Xie, I started to also think about other Asian American artists, and we saw a show. My Andy and I saw a show in the Bronx with Martin Wong, who is another artist of the 80s who sadly died of AIDS. But before he died, he made these incredible paintings, which I'd always seen online. It had never really quite like hit me. And then this is the beautiful thing about painting, right? Is that then you go and look at the paintings, and it's one, you have the scale, and then you have the texture. So I became really interested in him too, and I hope to write about him in some way one day. One of the most striking things in the show, and maybe I just am really preoccupied with death, but there's a small little alcove at the show, is at the Bronx Museum, which were the last paintings that he made of by then he had gotten sick. He had to move from New York back to San Francisco where his parents lived, and I guess maybe moved into his childhood home, but he was still painting, and the last things he painted were these little plants that at the window. So I've always wanted to write about those plants. So that's somebody. Anelise, how about you?
Yeah.
Oh, me? Oh, wait, what was, sorry. Oh, the research I'm writing about? Oh, there's been too many. Like for my, this book I'm writing about, Clam Down, I've been writing about way too many people. But yeah, I guess one, I can't even decide who to talk about right now. But
You're in
yeah,
question,
I'm
not
gonna
answer,
skip
but
that question because it's gonna take too long. Yeah.
That is fine. The next question is from Ed Lynn. He's a longtime friend of the workshop, of course, and it says, Lisa, you're a poet, you've written a novel. Why can't you stay in your own damned lane? This is verbatim from Ed.
Wait, in my own damn lane?
About crossing genres. You are a
Crossing
poet, it's
genres.
novel, like what? And I know we talked about sort of genre agnosticism, but
Yeah.
what has that
Well,
been
right,
like?
I did stop writing poetry. And one of the main reasons I did that, besides that, I don't think I was that good a poet. But so two reasons. One, I I started maybe because I stopped writing regularly to sort of keep the energy going. I was just writing, it was becoming like very ossified. Was that I was like, oh shit, I'm starting to make some of the same moves, both in ending and especially with endings. And I was like, that is not good. That means I need to really, I mean, I might have just started to write different poetry, but instead I decided I really needed to just start over. And I think that kind of beginner's uh, curve, right, where you're like, what is a novel? How do I do this? Is weirdly, in a weird way, how I got my poetry mojo back. I don't know. I was talking to my friend Allison Patey, who's a poet, and saying, or we were talking about poetry, and I was saying like, God, if there's anything that I've kept from being a poet, it's this weird like kind of mystical confidence in the form in a weird way. Like I was able to just sort of leave, um, even like the whole marketing industry of books aside and just sort of follow this sort of invention of mine that feels very much like how poetry moves, or at least the poetry that feels very alive to me, that it doesn't feel too familiar. Of course, I would not recommend that necessarily for people who are trying to publish books, but yeah, that was the natural. So yes, Ed, I'm sorry. I don't think I can go back. Hieroglyphics. I'll do that next.
Oh, that would be amazing. Please do. Another question, it's an interesting one. I don't know if there's a name, it just says AH asks, why is the book called Activities of Daily Living?
AH. Like my partner. But this is so funny. Annalise and I were just talking earlier today. She was driving home from an event that had women of a certain age involved in gardening. She was a talk, And then this woman saw her from across the lawn or something reading Activities of Daily Living, and she came, racing over afterwards, say, "What are you reading?" And then I was like, "Oh, maybe she knew the title because she's an older person, because the term is from it's a from the healthcare industry. They're called ADLs, and I'm going to forget the mnemonic, but it's basically it's not just for older people. It's for people recovering from strokes. It's for people with autism. It's for people with all sorts of ableism or disableisms, to figure out, can you live alone, or how much help do you need from a caregiver. Uh, in that in the book, there's a wry comment about a mnemonic that had been developed to remember what the activities of daily living are, and I think it's like, God, I'm blanking out. It spells out death, is what I remember. I think, oh, dressing, eating, ambulation, like moving, transportation, and hygiene. So this is something you learn. This is something that Alice learns when her dad becomes unwell. Is like, oh, can he live alone? If he doesn't live alone, what kind of care does he need? What kind of care? And then that spectrum keeps changing. And it's tough. And I think looking that in the face is right. Then you start to think, my activities of daily life, like, what am I still able to do? Like, you come out of those conversations just sort of like, I don't know if you've ever seen kids leave a dance performance. So cute, but when they come out, they're just like kicking the air and they're like imitating what they just saw. So you're just like, yes, I can do this right now. And then, of course, the title then becomes sort of like, as a touching shade thing, like activities of daily living. What does it take to sort of survive, or to, I don't know, something deep, I'm sure.
So interesting. Thank you. A couple more questions. This one is from George Sanchez. It says, Lisa, thank you for this. So interesting to consider the intersection of durational performances and how you are dealing with the mortality of your parents. How does this experience reflect your connection to this artist and narrative?
Wow. Can you say the question again? How does the life experience
Yeah.
affect the narrative?
Yeah, so interesting to consider the intersection of the durational performances and dealing with the mortality of your parents. And the question is, how does this experience reflect your connection to the artist and narrative?
The artist and the narrative. Wow, George is going right into the pit of the autofiction question. Let's see, how should I answer this? Well, let me answer it by describing a chapter in the book that discusses Linda Montano, who George will know because George is a performance artist, but she's another performance artist. And the reason she appears in the book is because, as I described at the beginning of the Zoom, is that the artist spent a year tied by like a rope to this other artist, and that other artist was her. And Alice is not a huge fan of Linda Montano's art, but then she gets into it and discovers that at one point Linda sort of left her teaching job, or couldn't get tenure. It was just, she'd kind of left this profession that she thought was like, this is what I'm supposed to do, is to become this tenured professor of performance art. No shade on that, but so she then moves back to upstate New York, to her family home, because her father is sick and he's had a stroke, and it's really tough. And she really, really gets into helping him with his activities of daily living. And she describes, at one point she just started filming him, and I think she writes something like, it was the only way that I could deal with or really look at what was happening, was weirdly through this lens. And I think that's, again, this is the weirdness of the project, I guess. The weirdness of art is that it's both it's kind of monstrous. You're kind of distancing yourself from, the extremity of life, or whatever it is that the trauma, whatever it is that you're trying to confront. But at the same time that you're putting that camera between you in this sort of dispassionate, you're like a lizard. It's really terrible. At the same time, it's giving you access to something that I think would somehow feels otherwise too big, too inexpressible, too terrifying. So maybe that's where form comes in. Again, back to the mess that Anelise described, like all the fragments that you're hoping that the project, the art, is transfiguring somehow. And again, going back to that 45-minute film, the real, the epiphany, I guess, that Touching Shay has is like something happened. Maybe it wasn't. Again, was it just for me? Am I selfish? Or was it necessary? For who? And then you try to get a grant for it. No, I'm just kidding. Again, it goes back to the strangeness of the project. If you're an artist, is like, Boris Groys is another. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but it's a philosopher who wrote this great essay called "The Loneliness of the Project," which is online as a PDF. I really, for anybody out there who's working on projects, it's this like terribly sad and funny and essay about just the project industrial complex. He's in the art world, so he's like describing everybody applying for grants, and we just keep describing these projects that we're going to do, and then some of them don't get made, and they're like these orphans that are like, isn't it kind of sad that we had all these drafts for the future that never happened? And then that's also the essay where I think Anelise was picking up on earlier on about like, what does this mean that we're working on this project where the completion of it or the making of it puts us desynchronizes the life that we're living, because we're already imagining like, this shit is happening right in front of me, and how will I use this in chapter 5? It's very disturbing. But I guess it's what some people do.
So fascinating. I am aware that we're at the end of our hour, so I have one more question, actually, for the two of you, that I'm really wishing that we were in the actual workshop space, and hopefully we will be back there soon so we could just spend hours chatting. The last question I have is really just something we try and do often at the end of our virtual workshop events, and kind of call it this act of calling absent friends into our space, although there are a lot of writer friends online with us today. But what I really would love is some recommendations from the two of you. I'd love to hear what you're reading recently, if there are writers or artists who are really intriguing to you or that you think people should know about, even if you just have some books scattered around near you that you want to pick up and share. I'd love to just one or two names from each of you to kind of have a recommendation list to go off into the night with. Anelise, I saw you pick something up.
Oh, I was looking at my shelf. So this is on my desk right now. This is The Great Migration by Sonia Shah. I mean, her thesis is basically she's saying that migration is normal, and the way we talk about migration and immigration is that it's an exception rather than the rule. And she's sort of trying to reverse that and show that in fact plants and animals have always migrated, and there isn't, no one is really endemic to a place, and there are no she's just really trying to question this like native invasive binary, and kind of slotting humans into that as well. But it's been a great read. So yeah, this one.
Yeah.
I have a stack of unread books, but the one I've gotten the farthest in is I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Georgi Gospodinov's Time Shelter, which is by Liverite. And this is a book that I think is coming out in a few months. So, and believe me, I was not special enough to receive an ARC. It was just that it was very Brooklyn story, which is that I was just walking in my neighborhood and found this giant like galley dump, and then like found, oh my God, it's this book that I've been wanting to read. It's called Time Shelter. He's Bulgarian. It's translated, and it's the concept is almost like a Pessoa. He invents the unnamed narrator meets a man named Gostin, um, who is fabricated, and Gostin has an idea that he's going to create these time shelters for people who have Alzheimer's and dementia. Floors in a building, and then later grows into like cities where people can walk into like a certain decade and recall the biscuits that they ate and sit in front of the television, tube television that they were used to, as a way to sort of resuscitate and soothe the mind that has kind of not working now in real time, I guess. So this is something that I mean, of course I was interested because I'm interested in all things dementia, but when my sister and I, real life, we're looking at some assisted living facilities, and this is in the book too. For my dad, that's one of the things we encountered were these sort of fake environments where like the cafeteria would have a jukebox and kind of look like a diner, or that you'd go out into the yard and there'd be like a bus stop where you could wait so that someone would come get you and bring you back. And this has become a phenomenon in Europe where they've been trying to make these towns that feel less like institutional homes and more like, oh, well, this is the village that I moved to. And it just makes so much intuitive sense. Like, don't we all want to live in a village? Like, I don't know. It's sort of great. So I'm just so excited to watch this idea explode in fiction.
Amazing. Time Shelter was the name of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Time Shelter. Amazing. Well, thank you both so much. This has been just totally fascinating. I have a page full of notes and lots of thoughts on projects and fragments and that tipping point between facts and lies in all of our fiction. So thank you. It's been an incredible evening. Thank you, Anelise, as well, for reading so closely, for guiding our conversation. And of course, as always, huge thanks to Pro Bono ASL, who helped make our events accessible. And special thanks to Jenny, who is on screen right now, and Jenna, who is on screen earlier. Thank you both so much. My colleague T is posting some links in the chat with links to purchase books, check out websites, follow social media accounts. So please do all of that. And we'll keep the Zoom open for another couple of moments so you can grab all of the links and information in the chat. But otherwise, thank you so much. Another virtual round of applause in the chat, please, for Lisa and for this amazing book. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Stay safe, everybody. We will see you soon.